I was finally able to publish a video essay highlighting the exquisitely crafted cinematography of The Family Man. The use of single takes in Family Man is something that helps in conveying the sense of captivity that the characters experience in the show. And since a single take involves the use of a handheld camera, the audience instantly feels like getting transported to that exact scenario of conflict. Now, if we talk about Delhi Crime, it is a story of how a bunch of cops are trying to overcome their obstacles while solving various crimes in the capital city. But how is it that in every episode, the audience can also feel that same amount of discomfort, that same amount of tension and fatigue, not just physical fatigue, but also emotional fatigue? How do you keep the audience hooked to your characters so much so that you eventually choose to dedicate your attention and find out how the plot thickens and what's the ending? Now, my answer to that is pacing. Let me know what is your answer. But my answer to all these questions is pacing. The pacing of the narrative, the pacing of the events that take place in your story. Because the pacing of each and every movement of your character can amplify and convey the emotional intensity of a conflict. And how do the makers of Delhi Crime achieve this pacing? The handheld camera. Now, when I say pacing, what I mean is how dynamic the environment of the characters is in the story, and how quickly or slowly are the events taking place in your story. Establishing the pace is a great way to serve the genre of your story and corroborate the feeling that your audience should have while watching the events unfold in your story. The handheld camera helps significantly to achieve dynamic filmmaking. But dynamic filmmaking can lead to some level of confusion for the audience. Sometimes it can become hard for the audience to catch up with whatever is happening in the story. To avoid this lack of understanding of the story from the audience, you need to strike a perfect balance of the pacing. Now, like I said, you can visually establish the pacing of your narrative by using a handheld camera. But how do you capture the characters of your story with a handheld camera? How do you point and shoot the handheld camera in a way that it locks the viewer's attention towards your character both externally and internally? Well, that is what we are going to do in this video. Without spoiling too much, we are going to take a look at a couple of scenes from season 2 of Delhi Crime and try to find out how Delhi Crime achieves its focused pacing of the story and tries to remove even the minutest possibility of distractions for the audience. Let's take a look at this scene from season 2, episode 2. From the opening shot itself, the handheld camera comes into action. The character in focus is DCP Vartika Chaturvedi. As she gets out of her vehicle, the camera starts following her movement. She enters a new crime scene, a new murder committed by the notorious gang. So we can say that this plot point is a new obstacle for DCP Vartika during her ongoing investigation. She asks about the condition of the victims who were brutally murdered. She consoles the granddaughter who is in a state of shock. She enters the house where the murder took place. She goes upstairs to learn more about what happened at the crime. An OTS or over-the-shoulder shot continues focusing on her as she discovers the condition of the victims, checks whether the balcony door was always open or not, and the camera pans away from her to focus on the blood trail. But it tilts up to focus again on our lead character. Now, this 2-minute opening scene is not a single take in its entirety. It comprises 2 single takes, and we can clearly notice a cut separating the two. But what's important is the camera is not losing its focus. The camera continues to lock the viewer's attention on DCP Vartika because it wants us to follow her lead. It wants us to discover the surroundings of the crime scene from the eyes of DCP Vartika. I mean, there was the opportunity of cutting to the face of Rasika Duggal's character here in this moment, but the makers chose to say no to this so that the audience can continue wearing DCP Vartika's shoes. As I mentioned earlier that we witnessed the use of the handheld camera to highlight the plot points when the stakes are high. Once again, in this same episode, we will see the handheld camera back in action. This time it is used to build narrative tension in the form of a cliffhanger. Just like for DCP Vartika, the camera waits for the character of Neeti Singh in this scene to get out of the car and bring the 2 suspects inside the hospital for a medical examination. Initially, you are tricked into believing that she is not the center of attention. But then Neeti Singh enters the frame and the camera starts following her with a laser focus. The audience is made to follow along and enter the hospital premises. There is no cut whatsoever. The camera becomes steady, and you will notice how the two suspects are kept in the background of the frame. They are out of focus because the camera wants the audience to quite literally not focus on them and feel distracted, just like how Neeti Singh gets distracted due to the phone call from her husband. She remains in focus and the camera is not cutting to the two suspects in the background, just like how Neeti loses her focus and ends up committing an unintentional mistake. 15 seconds after the call, the camera rack focuses on those two suspects escaping the police custody and then focuses back on Neeti. This camera movement signifies the realization of her carelessness. Then the handheld camera continues to follow Neeti as she starts running to prevent those suspects from escaping the hospital. Notice how the camera follows her as if it is running with Neeti to catch the suspects. This shaky camera movement is adding to all the tension that the character is experiencing in this scene. And eventually, we land at the entrance of that hospital from where this scene started. There are no cuts. The focus remains intact on Neeti while she contemplates her failure by dropping the F-bomb. We can also say that this moment also gives birth to Neeti's self-doubt about being incapable of doing the job. Plus, this also reminds us again of the difficult times that Neeti is going through in her marriage. This is how, once again, the audience steps into the shoes of the second lead character to truly understand her internal and external conflicts. The generous yet judicious use of a handheld camera is what helps in amplifying the intensity of the obstacles faced by the character in Delhi Crime. With a handheld camera, you can add the flavor of dynamic filmmaking and also lock the viewer's attention with your character. Therefore, you achieve impeccable pacing for your narrative that keeps your viewer anticipating for what is going to happen next. But before ending the video, I would like to leave you guys with another thought. You will notice how in almost every episode of Delhi Crime, both season 1 and season 2, the handheld camera is following the character before entering a crime scene or a room. Basically, whenever the narrative is set in motion by showing an important event, the handheld camera will keep the character in focus. Might not be a single take, but even a momentary decision to use this cinematography technique connects the audience with the character's mindset. What the character is feeling at this moment and what the character is going through is conveyed with this technique. And remember, I mentioned in the beginning of the video how I tried to explain the use of single takes in The Family Man. Well, this is the link of the video. You can go ahead and check it out. And as always, like, comment, share, subscribe. Do let me know your thoughts about this video. Whatever you saw in this video, let me know what you think about this. And I will see you soon in the next one. Till then, take care of yourself. And as always, long live cinema.